never believed in ghosts until I moved into the council house in Enfield with my family in 1977. My wife, Margaret, our two children, Janet and Johnny, and I thought it would be a fresh start for us. The house seemed ordinary enough, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. But soon, things started to change in ways we couldn't explain. It began innocently enough, with small disturbances, knocking sounds in the middle of the night, and objects subtly shifting out of place. At first, I blamed the creaks on an old house settling, while Margaret teased me about overthinking. But deep down, we both noticed it. The tension in the air, an invisible weight pressing down on us. Over time, these events escalated. Chairs would swivel abruptly, as though responding to an unseen force. Picture frames weren't just falling, they were leaping from the walls, splattering paint and glass in unnatural arcs. One afternoon, I was alone in the living room when the lights flickered. I saw a toy car roll across the floor, straight against the grain of the wooden boards. That's when I started keeping these occurrences to myself, unsure of how to explain the inexplicable. Janet, our eldest daughter, became the epicenter of this chaos. We'd hear her whispering late at night, not to herself, but to someone we couldn't see. Margaret dismissed it at first as a child's overactive imagination, but that changed the night Janet screamed, and we found her levitating above her bed. Her wide, terrified eyes pleaded for help, while her body twisted in a way that no child could fake. Her experiences worsened after that night. Doors slammed shut on their own, locking her inside rooms until we forced them open. Her schoolwork was found shredded in her backpack, even though no one had touched it. Johnny, our younger son, started avoiding the upstairs entirely. He described seeing a woman in old-fashioned clothing standing at the end of the hallway, her shadow lingering, even after she disappeared. One day, he came running downstairs, pale and shaking, claiming, "She reached out to touch me." Despite our disbelief, his fear was genuine, and his stories mirrored Janet's encounters. The sense of being watched followed us into every room, the oppressive energy growing heavier with each day. Desperate for answers, Margaret and I contacted Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, local paranormal investigators. They spent countless nights in our home documenting the inexplicable. One evening, as the investigators set up equipment, Janet began speaking in a voice that wasn't her own, deep, guttural, and distinctly male. The room's temperature plummeted, and the air grew so heavy it was difficult to breathe. Maurice later confided, "I've never encountered anything like this." The crescendo of this torment came one night when the house itself seemed to rebel. The walls vibrated, dishes shattered in the cupboards, and Janet's screams echoed through the house. She claimed the voice was commanding her to do things she refused to repeat. Johnny huddled in a corner, crying. Margaret and I clung to each other, praying silently for it to end. The investigators suggested a cleansing ritual, but even they were unsure if it would help. As they attempted the ritual, the house seemed to fight back. A mirror shattered, reflecting distorted images of our family that sent chills down my spine. Shadows darted across the walls, and a low growl reverberated through the air. Despite their best efforts, the disturbances continued, leaving us more terrified than ever. Weeks later, as mysteriously as it began, the activity dwindled. We eventually moved, leaving behind the memories and scars of those harrowing months. But even now, I sometimes wake at night wondering, were we victims of restless spirits, or had we stumbled into something far darker? Growing up, Raynham Hall was the pinnacle of local legend in Norfolk. Tales of the Brown Lady said to haunt its grand halls both captivated and terrified me. In 1936, I had the rare chance to witness her myself during a family visit. The evening was dreary, clouds heavy with unspoken threats of rain. Our group toured the estate, marveling at its elegance. As the sun sank below the horizon, shadows stretched longer, and the once inviting halls took on a more ominous feel. My grandmother, a devout believer in the supernatural, insisted, "We must stay until midnight. That's when she appears." In the library, ancient books lined the shelves, their spines cracked with age. The heavy drapes seemed to trap more than just warmth, as if they concealed secrets centuries old. At the stroke of midnight, a chill swept through the room, causing the candle flames to flicker. A tense silence fell over us, as though the air itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw her. At first, it was a shadow gliding across the grand staircase, but as she stepped into view, her form became clear. A woman in a flowing brown gown, her face hidden beneath the dim light. She moved gracefully, almost floating, but her movements spoke of sorrow, not malice. Her head turned slightly, and though her features were obscured, I felt her gaze pierce through me. The room seemed to pulse with energy. My voice caught in my throat as she paused, her presence so vivid it felt impossible to deny. She lingered at the base of the staircase before continuing her silent journey, fading into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. Afterward, my grandmother whispered, "That was Lady Dorothy Walpole. She's bound here by her grief." The thought of a spirit tethered by heartbreak sent shivers down my spine. Even years later, I couldn't shake the memory of her gaze, or the weight of the air in that room. Her story haunts not just the hall, but my dreams. But what if her appearances weren't random? Over the years, I've heard others share eerily similar encounters, often marked by the same sadness that lingers in her presence. It's as though she's trying to tell us something, a story lost to time, yet important enough for her spirit to endure. Whispers of forbidden love and betrayal echo through local legends, hinting at a tragic end that binds her to the hall. Her face, obscured by shadows, often appears in photographs taken by visitors, her sorrow etched into the very fabric of Raynham Hall. One late night, years after my first encounter, I returned to the hall. The staircase loomed as it had before, and I couldn't help but feel her presence. This time, however, I was prepared. I left a candle burning at the base of the stairs, a silent gesture of acknowledgement for a soul that seemed endlessly lost. As I walked away, the flame flickered unnaturally, as if responding to my unspoken words. And in that moment, I felt her sorrow lift, if only slightly, as though my act of kindness reached through the veil of time.
When I became the head of the Glamis Castle estate in the 1980s, I was eager to learn its history. The castle, steeped in lore, was said to house the Grey Lady, the spirit of Lady Janet Douglas. I dismissed the stories at first, believing them to be mere myths. But that changed one fateful night. I had decided to work late in the library, surrounded by towering shelves of books and the warmth of a roaring fire. Midnight approached, and with an unnatural chill that seeped into the room. The frost patterns on the windows grew intricate, almost deliberate, as though traced by an unseen hand. Lost in thought, I didn't notice the soft footsteps behind me until I felt a touch on my shoulder, light but undeniably real. Turning, I was met with the figure of a woman in a flowing gray gown. Her face was pale, almost luminous, and her sorrowful eyes seemed to hold centuries of pain. For a moment, time felt suspended. She raised a hand, pointing toward the grand portrait of Lady Janet Douglas above the fireplace. The room seemed to shift. Whispers echoed faintly, as if the walls themselves were recounting forgotten secrets. The Grey Lady didn't speak, but her presence was a story in itself. Her gaze lingered on the portrait, her hand trembling slightly before she faded into the shadows, leaving the room eerily still. That encounter left me shaken, but deeply connected to the castle's history. It was as if Lady Janet's sorrow reached across time to ensure her story wasn't forgotten. From that night, I never doubted the legends of Glamis Castle again. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the castle's archives. Journals and letters from centuries past revealed the tragic tale of Lady Janet. Wrongfully accused of witchcraft, she endured imprisonment and unimaginable torment before meeting a grim fate. Her unwavering dignity in the face of betrayal left a mark on the castle, binding her spirit to its ancient stones. Over the next few months, I experienced more unexplained phenomena. Doors creaked open on their own, and faint sobbing could be heard echoing through the halls during the still hours of the night. Guests and staff alike reported seeing her figure near the chapel, her presence accompanied by an overwhelming sense of sorrow. One evening, while inspecting the chapel, I discovered a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside were aged, crumbling documents, a letter from Lady Janet herself, pleading her innocence and condemning those who betrayed her. The ink had faded, but her anguish was palpable, as though the paper carried the weight of her final moments. After finding the letter, the activity seemed to intensify. It was as if the castle itself wanted the world to know her story. Shadows grew darker, and the air grew heavier in certain parts of the castle. Despite the fear these events evoked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of duty, to preserve her memory and ensure her suffering wasn't in vain. I began sharing her story with visitors, holding tours that honored her legacy rather than painting her as a mere ghost. As more people learned about Lady Janet, the atmosphere in the castle seemed to shift. The Grey Lady still appeared, but her visits carried less anguish and more tranquility, as though the recognition brought her some measure of peace. Even now, decades later, I sometimes catch a glimpse of her in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow, a faint whisper, or the soft rustle of fabric. The Grey Lady of Glamis Castle may never truly leave, but her presence is a reminder of resilience and the power of truth. Her story, etched into the very walls of the castle, ensures she will never be forgotten.
Serving as a night guard at Edinburgh Castle seemed like a dream job, but nothing could have prepared me for the encounters that would forever alter my understanding of reality. One October night, the fog lay thick over the battlements, muting the world beyond. As I patrolled the dim corridors, I heard the faint strains of bagpipes. The melody was haunting, filled with a longing that seemed to resonate within the very stones of the castle. Following the sound, I turned a corner and froze. There, near the battlements, stood a spectral piper, his translucent figure illuminated faintly by the moonlight. His fingers danced over the chanter, though no breeze moved his kilt. Another night brought an encounter far more unsettling. While patrolling the great hall, I heard the rhythmic clatter of drumsticks. Rounding a corner, I saw him, a headless drummer. Despite his gruesome appearance, there was a sense of dignity in his relentless march. His drumming echoed long after he vanished, leaving me rooted in place. The most astonishing encounter occurred in the castle's lower levels. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, I stumbled upon a ghostly procession of soldiers. Their armor gleamed, and their silent march exuded discipline. They passed by me without a glance, as though reenacting a moment in time long gone. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a living fragment of history replaying itself. As the weeks turned into months, these encounters became a regular part of my patrols. Shadows seemed to move independently, and whispers echoed down the corridors, even when no one else was present. On several occasions, I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, only to turn and find nothing but empty air. The castle's atmosphere, already steeped in history, seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. One evening, I was drawn to the dungeons by an unshakable sense of curiosity. The air grew colder as I descended the stone steps, the faint smell of damp earth and decay filling my lungs. As I reached the bottom, I saw a figure chained to the wall, an apparition of a prisoner, his eyes hollow with despair. He muttered words I couldn't understand, his voice echoing in the confined space. In a blink, he was gone. But the sorrow he radiated lingered long after. Another night, while patrolling the chapel, I heard faint singing. The voices were ethereal, harmonizing in a language long forgotten. Following the sound, I discovered an empty room bathed in a soft golden light. For a brief moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as though the spirits were sharing a fragment of solace amidst the castle's otherwise heavy energy. Over time, I began piecing together the stories behind these apparitions. The piper was said to have disappeared centuries ago while exploring the castle's hidden tunnels, his music the only trace of his existence. The drummer, a soldier who lost his life defending the castle, was doomed to march eternally in its halls. The ghostly soldiers were remnants of a historic battle, their discipline and courage immortalized in their spectral procession. The prisoner in the dungeon was perhaps the most tragic. Records suggested he had been falsely accused of treason and left to perish in the castle's depths. His anguish was a reminder of the injustices woven into the fabric of history. Despite the fear these encounters often evoked, they also deepened my connection to the castle. Each ghost carried a story, a fragment of the past that refused to be forgotten. It became clear to me that the spirits of Edinburgh Castle were not mere echoes. They were guardians of its legacy, ensuring that the events that shaped its history would never fade into obscurity. Even now, years after I left my position as a guard, the memories of those nights linger. Sometimes I dream of the piper's melody or the ghostly soldier's march. Edinburgh Castle isn't just a place. It's a living, breathing testament to the resilience of history and the souls who refuse to be forgotten. Its ghosts are not merely haunting. They are a part of the castle, as enduring as its stone walls and as eternal as the stories they carry.
Tower Bridge stands as a symbol of London's grandeur, but its haunting secrets are less known. Among them is the Lady in Black, a spectral figure said to roam its walkways. One November evening, the fog was so dense it swallowed the city's lights. As I patrolled the bridge's northern walkway, the sound of footsteps behind me stopped me cold. Turning, I glimpsed a figure in a flowing black gown. Her face was obscured by a veil, but her presence was undeniable. She moved with an elegance that belied the sorrow emanating from her. Curiosity drew me closer as she headed toward the bridge's central span. The fog seemed to part for her, and I followed, captivated yet cautious. When she stopped at the edge, I hesitated, unsure of what I was witnessing. Slowly, she turned toward me. Though her eyes were hidden, I felt their weight, an unspoken grief that chilled me to my core. Before I could speak, she vanished, leaving the fog to reclaim the space she had occupied. To this day, I wonder, was she mourning a lost love, or was she bound to the bridge by a tragedy no one remembers? Her story remains as mysterious as the bridge itself. As I delved into local lore, I discovered tales of a woman who had jumped from the bridge decades ago. Her life cut short by heartbreak. Some believe the Lady in Black is her restless spirit, forever searching for closure. Others claim she is a guardian of the bridge, watching over the countless lives that pass beneath its arches. Whatever the truth, her presence is undeniable, a lingering shadow on the edge of perception. One stormy night, I encountered her again. The rain fell in sheets, and the wind howled through the iron beams of the bridge. I was making my rounds when I heard the faint sound of crying. Following the sound, I found her standing at the same spot as before, her figure illuminated by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. This time, she turned fully toward me, and for a moment, I saw her face. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but also with a quiet determination. She raised a hand as if to reach out, then disappeared into the mist. The encounters didn't stop there. Over the years, I saw her many times, always in the same spot, always with the same air of melancholy. Her presence seemed to coincide with moments of personal loss or turmoil in my life, as though she was drawn to sorrow. It was as if the bridge itself was a conduit for grief, amplifying the emotions of those who crossed it. I began to notice patterns in her appearances. She would often appear after particularly tragic events in the city, accidents, fires, or other losses. Her presence seemed to serve as a reminder of the fragility of life and the weight of unresolved pain. The Lady in Black wasn't merely a ghost. She was a symbol of the bridge's history, a living embodiment of the countless lives and stories tied to its towering arches. To honor her memory, I started leaving small offerings at the spot where she appeared. A flower, a candle, or a note of remembrance. Others who had seen her began to do the same, turning the walkway into an unofficial shrine. The offerings didn't stop her appearances, but they seemed to bring a sense of peace to those who left them. Even now, long after I left my position as a guard, I still think of her. Tower Bridge is more than just a marvel of engineering. It's a place where history and the supernatural intertwine. The Lady in Black may never speak, but her presence tells a story of love, loss, and the enduring connection between the living and the dead. Each time I visit the bridge, I leave a small token at her spot, a silent acknowledgement of a spirit that has become as much a part of the bridge as its iron beams and towering spires. Her story, like the bridge itself, endures, a testament to the power of memory and the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding.